Today marks 1 year since somber anniversary here. 4 officers killed in an ambush in East Charlotte. And today at 5:30, we're going to take a look at that day. What has changed? The questions we still have in honoring the officers. Of course, a couple of weeks ago, we did have one of the officers here, CMPD, one of the survivors who was injured, Mike Giglio, I believe, who played in the Salute to Heroes event over the weekend, last weekend at Bojangles Coliseum. Nate Morbido now here joining us in the Live Impact studio. And Nate, we were both covering that fateful day a year ago. And I remember just having to get to the studio before 2 o'clock and then thinking we didn't have much information, but then having to come back, and then it was what we call wall-to-wall coverage, and it was for the next 5 hours sitting there in the studio as details were slowly coming in and then bringing you in with all of the updates.
Yeah, I remember that afternoon. The newsroom can be a loud place at times, but it also can be really quiet. And I remember our assignment desk manager saying something about officers down. Mm-hmm. And you immediately think, this is not good.
Right.
And if you remember on that day, very early on, there was some misinformation about where this happened, which really slowed everything down for the news gathering purposes. Like, there was a time when the assignment desk was trying to figure out where is the actual location of the shooting, right? And one of the biggest things that I push just through my many years in this business and from my mentors who have taught me this, there is no rush to get out information from our perspective, especially this kind of sensitive information situation. Rather, we are trying to be very methodical and make sure we're right before we release this. I had received some information early on that this was going to be a terrible afternoon. And there was just no rush to get that on the news, because what if that information is wrong, right? And you want to make sure families are notified early on. But as that afternoon continued moving, it was pretty clear when all the different hospitals were on standby, when roads were getting closed down, that this was turning into something that was going to be the worst day for law enforcement in our city's history. And it was really tough, because you start thinking, well, what can we do to try right now to get information out to the public, right? And I think in a lot of times in these tragedies, we're concerned with the number, right? It is school shooting, God forbid. How many people, how many officers, right? And instead of going that route early on, I started looking up the neighborhood where this happened and tried to start calling neighbors there. And I did make contact with several people who lived in that neighborhood, maybe who worked nearby, to just get a sense of how tense it was out there. Was this an active scene? Because that's information we can share to the public. It's not about how many.
No, it's a public safety issue.
Exactly. We're sharing critical information to the public right then and there. The end result will be the end result. We'll get that information. And that's what I mean when there's not really a rush to get numbers and names on there. We're trying to get the information that the public needs right then and there.
Right.
Which is, what is the current situation? I remember Richard Devane, who was out there, one of our reporters, made contact with someone who had video or an image of that happening. I started communicating with that person, and we were able to get an image on TV fairly quickly about what it looked like there.
Right.
We had a drone operator out there, but he couldn't get a drone up at the time, right?
Yeah, we had a lot of restrictions.
Exactly.
The field, the area that was cordoned off, I suppose, just getting bigger and bigger.
Right, that was kind of far away. So it was really hard to get eyes on the situation. And I think that's why it's so important. I was here in the newsroom still. You kind of have to have people here still, not just the people that go on air and deliver the news, but initially gathering the news so that we can make phone calls, so that we can see a map, so that I can look at property records to see who the owners are, so I can try to find their phone numbers. We went through all of that process the day of. And I remember as we started kind of getting ready to go on the news, for my role in this, it was kind of eerie just how the last time a couple officers were killed here in Charlotte was like a mile or two away from this exact scene.
Interesting.
So it's just such a sad day. And I remember in the days after, early on I was very focused on who the shooter was and kind of uncovering his record a bit and if the justice system failed these officers that day. But then I watched the funerals that were published, particularly the CMPD officer's funeral. I just remember listening to his widow's words and being they were so powerful. And I was just struck at how strong she was in that moment to deliver that. And I think that we saw a lot of that, right? Thomas Weeks' wife later talked to our Sarah French at the time, and just seeing her strength to kind of deal with this terrible situation. Yeah, I mean, just a horrible situation, the worst possible situation. And then you see, at his funeral, these people that are speaking, just with great stories. These are human beings who went to work that day, had a job to do. I can't imagine that they thought this to this level could happen. I'm sure they prepared for a situation where things could go sideways. But this amount of death and injuries, particularly when you have a shooter who was up high in the house, who was clearly not surprised by their arrival. That's a problem when you're trying to serve a warrant on a fugitive. You want to catch them by surprise. They really didn't have a ton of time to react. And I remember, sadly having to watch some video of these officers that were kind of trying to protect themselves from a bit of a distance away. Some were on a fence, some were in a carport, and you could see bullets going by. And I just can't even imagine being in that situation. And then, their fellow officers are there trying to help, and they don't really know the full extent of this either. There is some radio traffic that's kind of painting a picture for them. But, at one point they thought there was a second shooter because of, remember that?
The uncertainty of where the bullets were coming from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so complex. And even a year later, we really don't know exactly what happened. We have an idea. If you remember, the body camera from this incident wasn't released. That's kind of the one thing that, although difficult for us to watch and then make decisions about what to release, if anything, that would have helped piece together some of this from the public's perspective. But even in the weeks after, number one, I looked at federal funding and warning signs that the Marshals Service had given members of Congress about this kind of thing potentially happening. We found some federal audits that kind of raised questions about training in the past for the task force officers. Remember, this was a task force that was serving a warrant. And you start also looking at the system, the institution, right? Not so much about individual decisions that day, but the system that brought those officers there that day. We talked to several different experts who even still today wonder, why did they serve the warrant on that day in the afternoon?
Right, that was a question that popped up almost immediately.
Right, it just, for some people, it seemed odd. But, then we talked to those experts and they say, I mean, if you get a tip that this person is there right now at this location, you go with it. Because if you don't go right away, they may be gone. And maybe this was their window. Those are the questions that we don't really know. I'm sure there are people that do know that information, and I'm not sure it will ever really be public. But part of our job has been trying to figure out, well, what were the lessons learned? Because I don't know if you remember, but early on, he's now retired, but the director of the Marshals Service said, we're going to learn from this. We're going to try to take a real hard look. We know the risk is getting greater. We're going to try to figure out what we can do better to prevent this in this future. So, I had covered a couple of different stories after, we can talk about in a minute, but one of my main projects was trying to figure out, well, what is the status of this internal review? What is changing because of this? And I made some what we call Freedom of Information Act requests. These are requests that anybody in the public can make to their government. And I did this to the U.S. Marshals Service just to try to get an idea, like this after action review, which they call, where does it stand? Is it done? What is changing because of this? And this is a document that I received. It's the only documents that I got, actually, and I think they sent it to me in September. Yeah.
Okay.
This was.
How long did it take to receive those?
I mean, they did a pretty good job. Maybe a couple months, maybe less than that.
It's not bad considering.
Yeah, I mean, the Marshals Service really has been great to work with in this situation, considering the terrible tragedy it's been. I mean, if you think about early on, too, I'm doing stories about how they warned about this, how their training was an issue before, and they've been really respectful of our reporting, knowing that this is our job, is to ask these questions, is to be skeptical. You can, and I think I said this on the air, you can be both respectful and revere these officers and honor their sacrifice, and at the same time ask the questions that this kind of situation demands, because we don't want this to happen again.
No.
So anyways, these records here were interesting because it showed that in July, the survivors of this shooting went to a training facility in Georgia and met with the Marshals Service and explained what equipment immediately they think could help improve safety. Now you'll see it's redacted here. That's not uncommon. This is confidential, this is sensitive. You don't want to give criminals the upper hand against law enforcement. So we knew that at least there were some recommendations early on taking place. But also we had a change in administration at the president level, right? So you have also people in positions that change. I mentioned the director of the Marshals Service has since retired. So this after action review the federal government had started is not done yet. I mean, it's been a full year, and let's be real here, this was an incredibly complicated shooting, an unusually high number of people that were killed that day, and you had a change in administration. This is still going through the process, and this after action review is going to look at what worked, what didn't work, what they could do better in the future. And here we are a year later. We still don't know that.
Now, you like you said, you've done many stories, had a revisit with each one. You also talked to Congressman Mark Harris. What was that conversation? Why go to him, and what was that conversation
so
like?
Congressman Mark Harris, he's a freshman representative, and he's on the House Judiciary Committee. That is a really powerful committee when it comes to oversight over the U.S. Marshal Service. So he really has a stake in kind of holding that agency accountable, particularly when it comes to funding in the future, number one. Number two, he has signed on to a couple of bills meant to, as he would say, back the blue, better protect law enforcement. He also represents part of Charlotte and the surrounding area. And so we wanted to talk with him about what his expectation is moving forward. And here's what he told us.
It's what you can learn from it. If there were mistakes that were made, you learn. If there's more information that could have been available, try to see how you can get that more information available, so where everybody has the data, everybody knows what they're walking into.
Yeah, important, right? You know what history tells you you might walk into. Through our reporting for a story that's going to air tonight at 5:30, we interviewed a former chief of staff for the U.S. Marshals Service and a former marshal. His name's Art Roderick. He knows what these officers went through to some degree because he was involved in a deadly firefight back in the 90s. I don't know if you remember hearing about Ruby Ridge in Idaho.
Yeah.
It was very well known at the time, kind of infamous actually on a lot of fronts. And his partner was shot and killed. And he knows what happens in those situations. He refused to leave his colleague there. He said, they ordered me off the mountain, I wouldn't go. I didn't leave till the next day. I wanted to make sure that we could get his body off the mountain.
Yeah.
He also knows the importance of learning from this kind of a situation and how critical it is to, you can never, and multiple experts have told us, you can never get comfortable in these situations. You always have to be on your toes and be prepared for things to go sideways.
Right. My husband always likes to say, head on a swivel.
Yeah, firefighter, right?
Firefighter. So and as a spouse of a first responder, that same idea you talked about, you might be prepared. Chances are you're going to come home at the end of your shift, but there is that very small chance that you might not. And something in the back of the mind, but you can't let that rule your existence and vocation, right?
Yeah, I just want to point this out too. I'm really proud of how we handled this situation as a news organization too, because we have been so sensitive. We have tried to be so sensitive in every aspect of our reporting to respect the families of those fallen,
right,
to respect the survivors, to also respect the viewers and the public that demand a safer world to live in.
Yeah, I mean, and back in the day, or some organizations still, they just want to get the news out there fast and furious to be the first to report it. Many times it's not right, but we will be sensitive to the people involved and make sure we have confirmed and verified things. But something like this, too, is very fluid. And I just remember being there on the desk and just thinking that this is, we have very little information to go by, and I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. We are trying to get our crews into place out there, but like you said, it was hard to get to the scene. It's hard to show what folks are doing and operating without giving tactics away, and be sensitive to the actual police operation, because that is still an ongoing, an active situation. So, yeah, just that day was tough, not only for, you know, us media folks, but really everyone, neighbors, people who just were not knowing what to do when they were caught in the jam up. We talked to Kaylin Hagwood yesterday, and she, in the days following, would talk about the mental health aspect, because it was so intense. You know, that day, the next couple of days, you having to revisit you know, a different angle, uncovering something else, which is still ongoing, evidently. You know, what is that like for you, having to kind of dip in and out of that sort of story?
Yeah, I mean, so you never really forget about it, number one. This is always in the back of my mind, what happened there, and what other questions haven't we asked. There was a time when I had to listen to the scanner traffic, which was very difficult to hear. I mean, we didn't know which officers survived, which didn't. But there were very graphic things described about how to try to get these officers out and get them to the hospital. And I found that to be very difficult. And even when we put together our story, we like altered voices on the scanner because we didn't want one of the fallen officers' voices to be on there. We wouldn't know that unless they said it.
Wow.
So that was really challenging. And you know, I heard the woman that was in the house. Remember, there was a woman and her daughter in there.
Oh, right.
Like, you could hear that phone call and the tense situation. Remember, they interviewed her initially. They thought maybe she was a suspect, and then they let her go. And you're thinking to yourself, my goodness, you're trapped in a home with a person who is shooting at police. They're shooting back. I mean, I'm just thinking about, there's a kid in the home. I mean,
all kinds.
It's a lot. And again, you know, there were a few months there after where I received a tip about a situation involving a handful of CMPD officers who essentially decided to end their workday that day as it started happening. I don't know if you remember that. They logged off the computer. They basically became unavailable to respond, and their colleagues were upset about that, because in this kind of situation, you always hear, we run toward the danger, we don't run away. And we were so careful and so delicate and so sensitive and trying to be really fair to the truth of what happened there. The majority of officers absolutely were heroes that day. They ran out there, they did what they could to save. And hearing the scanner traffic, I know that because I heard it. But at the same time, making sure those that didn't do that, if they violated policy, are held accountable in some way. Because if those officers, the idea was from their colleagues, if they're not going to respond to their own officers getting shot at, what will they do for the general public? And, you know, that was a very challenging story to tell, because we were trying to be respectful and sensitive and not paint a picture like all officers did this, but at the same time hold the police department accountable. And I remember the police department, their spokespeople, kind of were really trying to not get us to air the story, essentially. And I made an effort to go to a press conference, did not put a camera in anyone's face, which I could have done. I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to be really clear about, we're trying to be fair and trying to really understand so that we can be accurate in our reporting. So, you know, it's just that. It's the whole, you know, trying to be respectful, but also trying to ask the questions that matter. And I do think that we've kind of missed that a little bit in the year that's come after this. You know, there was the DA's review. Remember the officer involved trying to decide if the use of force was okay.
Yes, right.
And Spencer Merriweather published his report and found, you know, no issue there. But there's so much unanswered. And from a public's perspective, I can understand why some will never be released because they are sensitive information. But there is a need for, I think, some reassurance that we're going to continue to improve and be better. And I mean, if you remember, CMPD kind of got embroiled in this little bit of a public debate about the outer carrier vests.
Oh, yeah.
Remember? That was
Yeah,
that was kind of in the aftermath of this. Should patrol officers be allowed to wear these? You can put extra armor in them. They have certain hooks that can help you pull people out quickly. And in the end, the chief agreed to let it happen, but it was really like this
a bit of a struggle
for a while. It kind of rose to the city council level. So we know that's changed. We know the city of Charlotte did not do an after-action review. That's what CMPD tells me in this case, or at least published one. We know they had several debriefs on this issue. Again, I imagine they have changed some things because of it, but they're not publicizing what that is. It's just important to ask those questions on the same day that we're honoring the lives of those officers who are no longer with us. We want to, in their name, make sure that people just like them are protected moving forward. And so it can be uncomfortable, but that is the job, at least for me, that I do at this TV station. And all of us have a critical role in making sure this story is told completely, right? And I remember you and all of our anchors and reports just being so calm that day, which is also really, really critical. You know, at some point when I found out how many officers were at that point likely dead, you know, your kind of heart starts racing a bit. It'd be very hard to immediately go on and try to report that to people. You do such a good job in a calm way to not, I guess, lessen the severity or impact of it, but also not be in a way that's kind of jumpy and, you know what I mean, that can kind of make everybody's nerves. Because, you know, when you're an anchor, you kind of trickle down to the rest of the newsroom.
Sure.
And our job is to be as calm as possible in that moment to try to get the news out.
Appreciate that. Yeah, it's one of those, because everything was unknown, we are to lead with the voice of calm, hopefully, as this was a public safety issue, a lot of unknowns, and the team and, you know, that we are in the newsroom, it is more than just the people in the studio and the reporters out there in the field. So trying to get the information timely, accurately. But I do remember one viewer in the days after said, saw you guys, I felt like I didn't have to, and I didn't change the channel because everyone was really, you know, honing in on what was happening, and they felt that our coverage was complete and gave them what they wanted and needed from all their questions and their curiosity and concerns for their neighbors.
What I also love too, that we covered and we showed the funerals that were public.
Yes.
We decided to do that as a station, which I think was so important because they were so full to begin with. And, you know, I was hanging on every word that was said there because they were so powerful. And you want to really, I think it's hard in this business, especially when things happen, having covered many tragedies, you're so in your job there that you cannot emotionally fully understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I really made it a point to watch as much of those as I could so that I could be touched emotionally and not forget the severity of what happened, so I can remove myself from the job and be 100% a person as I listened to that. And I remember getting emotional and tearing up just listening to one of the widows speak. It's just so hard, but important that we don't lose sight of that. This isn't a news story. This is real life.
Yeah, these are people. We might not know them, but we know them. We know their story, a connection, a family.
Yeah.
Okay, Nate Morabito, thank you. What a look back, you know. Thank you for your take on that and important work that you continue
All
to
of
do.
us do it. Yep.
All right. 1 year later, today, 5:30 p.m., 4 officers, a year ago, killed in an ambush in East Charlotte. At 5:30, we're going to take a look at the day and things that Nate touched upon. What has changed, the questions we still have, and where we need to go.